Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the session on using data to drive smarter decision making as part of Kalibrate's Fuel and Retail Innovation Summit of 2021. Before we get started, I just wanted to give you a quick introduction to myself. So my name's Rich Wilcox. I currently head up the data operations team. I've been with Kalibrate for just over 6 years, and I've spent roughly half of that in a client-facing role, and the second half in the internal operations role, where I've been closely involved in the planning transformation project and the delivery of Kalibrate planning and our insight products. As part of today's session, I'd like to cover 4 things with you. First of all, the data challenge and the types of challenges that our clients and retailers in general face when sourcing the right data to solve network planning challenges. I'll talk about the Kalibrate 7 elements and how we carry out macro and micro market insights. And I'll talk about how we use all of this to make better decisions. One thing that I won't necessarily be talking about in too much detail today is the application of this data and how it's used across Kalibrate's decision suite, although there have been a variety of sessions as part of the virtual user conference looking at the various different products in detail. So if you haven't attended those sessions, I'd encourage you to do so. Before we jump into today's content, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to ask any questions throughout. So if you can use the questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen, feel free to ask questions at any point, and I'd encourage you all to ask as many questions as you like, and we'll answer as many of those as possible at the end of today's session. And any we're not able to answer today, we'll follow up on shortly after the session today. Okay. So the variety of challenges that retailers face when trying to find the right data to have a foundation for decision making. And some of these challenges are universal, they're applicable in any market across the globe, but some are very specific to the type of market in which a client operates. But Kalibrate is fortunate in that we have experience in over 80 markets globally, so we're very familiar with what it takes to use data to drive smart decision making on a global scale. So I'd now like to talk through some of the data challenges that are applicable to all markets, and then I'll look specifically at developing and developed markets and different challenges that might be faced in those two types of markets. So first of all, looking at all markets in which we operate, there are a variety of challenges that are universal. The first one is around understanding market positioning. So it's challenging for retailers to be able to understand where they stand in terms of outlet share, but more importantly, market share. So understanding the size of the pie that they have in the market and how they stack up against the local competition. The second challenge that retailers generally face is around data silos. So typically there is a wealth of data available across the business, but it sits across various different teams and pieces of software and databases, and it can become challenging to access the right data that you need to be able to answer a question or solve a specific problem. And looking outside of the business or outside of the core teams, generally retailers are reliant on a number of different third-party data sources as well. And these disparate data sources can be quite useful individually, but really the value comes from aligning them and bringing them together. However, bringing together multiple disparate data sources with different keys, different lat longs, can be an extremely challenging thing to do. And it's something that many retailers just aren't able to do efficiently and effectively. So we've got data that exists in the business across a number of different silos, and we've got a number of different disparate data sources that come from third parties, but we often have to plug the gaps. We have to send people into the field or carry out desktop surveys for specific locations or sites, and getting the data that's needed to be able to give you a clear and consistent view of what's going on in a specific market can be incredibly intensive in terms of timescales to get that data and the manpower needed to be able to go out and collect the data. Often people are very reliant on site managers or territory managers, or even having people from head office travel out into the field and go and get that data themselves. Another challenge, we've talked a lot about COVID and the impact of COVID, And one of the impacts of the last 12 or 18 months has really been the acceleration of new competition coming to market. Traditional retailers have diversified in their offering, and they've looked to bring new products and offerings to market that help them kind of ride out some of the challenges that they've seen with COVID. Things like adding drive-throughs, adding curbside pickups. But at the same time, a lot of non-traditional competitors have started to emerge. In the US, if you look at things like Amazon Prime Now or services like GoPuff, there is a new breed of competitor that operates in a very different way, and really understanding how they operate, how they're gaining in terms of their competitive positioning in the markets, and what the impact of those changes is to your network or your competitors' networks can be incredibly challenging. And there's very little data available, and what is available can be somewhat fragmented and difficult to understand and project the impact of over time. Another key challenge, and we have spoken a lot about this in the virtual user conference so far, and we've got a couple of great sessions still planned, is around EV and alternative fuel adoption. So all retailers are looking to the future, and EV is obviously a big part of that. Retailers are trying to understand how they can capitalize on the changes that are about to happen in their markets. And again, we need data to be able to understand what the current position of alternative fuels is in the market and how we expect those markets to change over time. So these are some of the challenges that are applicable across the board, but there are also some challenges that are more applicable to both developing markets and developed markets. And I wouldn't necessarily think of this as two different buckets. It's more of a spectrum, but for simplicity's sake, I've grouped some of the challenges into developing markets and developed markets. I'm fortunate enough to work with retailers all over the world and understand a variety of different problems that they face. And in some developing markets, the challenges can be quite basic. Understanding how many sites you've got and where those sites are is a given for many retailers. However, where there's been significant change in the market, where there's been a number of acquisitions, or whether businesses have just been run poorly in the past in terms of data visibility, some retailers just need to get a firm grasp on where their sites are, how many sites they've got, and how they're performing. And that's something that we can help with. In developing markets, there's generally a lack of demographic data. Either it's incredibly outdated, or it's incomplete, or it simply doesn't exist within easy reach. And similarly for traffic, especially in markets where there are big infrastructure projects, where the roads are not necessarily developed or organized in any structured way, it can be difficult to understand traffic patterns, where traffic flow is at its highest, where there are congestion issues, and generally where there are big infrastructure projects and significant growth of the population, it can become quite difficult to also understand the future demand. And again, that's one that's also applicable to developed markets, but in markets such as India, for example, the pace of change is so great that the need for insights into future demand patterns is more important than elsewhere. In developed markets, retailers typically have larger scale loyalty schemes. And one of the challenges that retailers face is understanding how to capitalize on the data that exists as part of that loyalty scheme, and help them use it to make informed decisions. Whereas in some developing markets, we have a lack of demographic data. In more developed markets, often we have a choice of demographic data. So we need to understand what the right data source is to solve the problem that we're working on. Another challenge is around mobility data. Now, mobility data can be available in some developing markets, but primarily it's available in more developed markets. And I'll talk a little bit about what mobility data is later on, for those of you that aren't completely familiar. But it's massive mobile data can be quite a daunting thing. The volume of the data and the amount of insight that you can glean from it is difficult for some retailers to get their head around and to be able to use effectively. And also in developed markets, there's generally a much more of a focus on retail drivers and point of interest, and understanding how to track those retail drivers and how to do it accurately can be a real challenge. But luckily, Kalibrate is experienced in helping retailers with all of these challenges, and we do this every day. And the Kalibrate approach to helping retailers is really to research the data available within each market. So we've got a team of skilled analysts and GIS analysts, market and industry specialists that can help research all of the data that is available in the market and help us narrow down the list of applicable or suitable sources for further investigation. Once we understand what data is available within a market, we can start to round out how we want to acquire that data and what gaps exist. And in many cases, we do have to help clients plug those gaps. And we can do that in a variety of different ways. But what we essentially try and do is take a smart approach to data collection where we select only the most appropriate sources in each market for each product that we're trying to analyze, and where there are gaps, we can supplement that. Traditionally, we've supplemented those gaps with in-field surveys. So we have a team of experienced analysts and surveyors all over the world that can go out and collect the data that we need. However, with the recent acquisitions that Kalibrate's made, we also have a suite of new tools available to us that can help clients collect that data effectively and efficiently as well, leveraging the teams that they have in the field so that they don't have to rely entirely on Kalibrate to provide a turnkey solution. Once we have that data in-house, we have a variety of proprietary modeling techniques that can help us combine those disparate data sets, spatially match the various different data sets that are available, and to have one kind of cohesive source of truth that retailers can rely on to make smart decisions. And many of you will be familiar with the 7 elements, and we generally try and align all of the data that we collect with one of the 7 elements to provide a simple and understandable approach to analyzing your network's performance, both at a market and at a site level. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the 7 elements for retail success, this is a concept that Kalibrate's had for some years now, where we essentially say these are the 7 things that we think every retailer should focus on when looking to improve or optimize their network. And we start off by looking at the location strength. So we look at things like traffic and demographics and the local trade area, and we understand what the location potential of a site is. So not necessarily considering anything that we've built on that site, or we just look at the dirt strength, many people call it, and what we think we can achieve in terms of sales for that location. We then start to look at the local market impact. So we look at things like proximity to and density of local competition, points of interest, so proximity to things like volume drivers, whether that be educational institutions, shopping malls, sports stadiums, places of worship, things that can have an impact on our site performance. From there, we can look at brand, things like brand presence and consistency of performance within that market. And we can look at the facilities. So this might be the size of the store, number of parking spaces, it could be number of fuel pumps for a gas station. Typically, facilities are the things that require capital investment change. And then we look at merchandising. So these are things that can be changed with smaller operational investments. So in-store offerings, for example, product selection. Then we can look at price position, either looking at the snapshot in time or by looking at dynamic pricing data over time. And finally, we can look at the operations. And this is generally the intangible factor, the way that site is operated, and anything else that might impact that overall site's performance. So what I would like to do today is go through a short case study where we step through each of the 7 elements, and I'll talk a little bit more about the types of data that we use and how retailers can use them to make informed decisions. But before I move on, we'd just like to launch a quick poll and ask you which of the 7 elements you find most challenging in terms of data availability today. So I'd encourage you all to respond to that poll, and we'll pick up on the results towards the end of the presentation. So let's start off with location. We can look at the location strength at a national level right down to a kind of a micro market level. And what we can do is assess the socio-demographics of the population. Here we can see this is population density of the US, but we can look at many different demand or demographic attributes, right from population to age range, ethnicity. We can look at things like consumer spending habits, customer segmentation, to really understand the population distribution and more than just a population count, who those potential customers actually are. And once we understand the demographics, we can also look at things like traffic patterns. So you may be aware that Kalibrate has a product called Traffic Metrics. We are the biggest aggregator of publicly available traffic data in the US and many other markets globally. So we can use this data to understand traffic patterns as they exist today, but we can also look at projected future changes, things like current year estimates where current data is not available, 5-year projections where we want to understand how we anticipate traffic conditions to change over time. And for the first time, we can also look at truck traffic or HGVs for those of you in Europe. To understand, if you do have an offering that is focusing specifically on truck traffic, how that differs to your standard vehicle traffic. And we can use this data to understand the location potential of existing and new sites. And this is just an example where we've looked at a combination of things like population density, and I think in this case, fast food affinity, to understand where there may be potential to expand a network, again, in the US in this case, and select the right markets for expansion. And you can also use this data to assess projected growth, and to essentially look at different markets you could expand into to understand where you can get the biggest return on investment. So once we've looked at location, we then start to look at local market conditions. So in this case, I've zoomed in from the US to Denver, and I'm going to start off by revisiting those demographics and traffic. So here you can see I've got some basic demographics mapped, and I've got traffic counts. I think the red dots are your standard traffic, and the blue is your truck traffic. So I'm understanding my local market conditions. But to really understand the market in which I operate, I can start to use things like drive time analysis. So in this case, I've selected a site that exists in Denver, and I've started to do some analysis on its location. So I'm using urbanity classification to try and determine what type of location this is. And there are 3 options available, 5, a 10, and a 15-minute drive time. In this case, I know that this is a fairly urban area. So a 5-minute drive time would probably make the most sense. And I can use that drive time to help me understand my local trade area. Or I also have the option to start to bring in things like mass mobile data to truly understand the trade area of this location. So I mentioned earlier mass mobile data, and many of you will be familiar with mass mobile data. There is a dedicated session on it for the virtual user conference, and I'd encourage you to sign up to that if you haven't already. But mass mobile data effectively leverages location services that are embedded into third-party mobile applications. So there's a small piece of code. Most people in the audience here will have a smartphone. Many of you will have location services enabled on it. If you do, then that data is harvested anonymously behind the scenes, and we can use it to help inform our trade area analysis and definition. So in this case, as you can see on the lower right-hand section of the screen, we've what we call geofenced a location, drawn a polygon around it. Whenever someone with location services and a relevant mobile application enters that geofence, we are capturing their visit, we're capturing their home location, and that is giving us an understanding of the transiency of that site, and it allows us to inform our catchment definition. So we're using the combination of drive times, in this case, and mobility data to try and define the local market of that site as accurately as possible. In addition to that, we can also look at point of interest in that market. So in this case, we're looking at various different locations. So we can see things like educational institutes, shopping malls, grocery stores, and we can see all of the different types of locations that are available to us. And we can use that to, again, inform our understanding of the local markets and the types of locations that might impact my overall performance, and also potentially non-traditional competition that might have an impact. Things like, if you're a C-store operator and there's a pharmacy nearby, you might not necessarily think of them as a direct competitor. You might do, but if you don't, you can still have visibility of where they exist and if that's having an impact on your performance. And we can also start to leverage marketing insights to understand which loyalty customers, for example, we currently have in this market, how frequently they visit our site. And again, that can give you a wealth of information to understand your local market. Oops. Excuse me. Moving on to brand. So we can look at the performance of a brand, at a market level, at a national level, or even down to the brand impact at a site level. And we use, at a basic level, we start to understand the outlet share, the market share, and of course the market effectiveness. So many of you will be familiar with the term market effectiveness, but essentially if you have 10% of the outlets in the market, it's fair to assume that you should have 10% of the sales volumes. If you have a market effectiveness of 1. Anything above 1 is great. Anything below 1 is not so good. And it's a nice simple way of using some high-level data to understand how you're performing relative to your local competition. So we can use that data to really understand our brand positioning, as I said, at various different levels. And we can also use some of the 7-element insights to give us a more in-depth understanding of where brands are positioned in the markets. So in this case, we're using what we call our performance potential quadrant, where we're looking at the location potential of a location as the x-axis, and the actual performance of that site as the y-axis, and we're breaking brands down, or a market down at a brand level, into 4 quadrants, and we can understand where brands are performing well and where there is opportunity for improvement in the performance of those brands at a market level. And we can also get the same level of insight down to a site level if required. So next we can move on to facilities. So we really want to understand the facilities at a location. And as I said, facilities are normally things that require capital investment to change. And we can use facility information, things like store size, number of parking spaces, number of EV charging points, for example, to understand the strengths and weaknesses of one site relative to its local competition, and to also understand what types of facilities are driving sales at a location. And this can be incredibly useful for analytics and modeling purposes, but it can also drive significant internal operational improvements. I have clients that I've worked with in the past that used to do a tremendous number of site visits, sending people out into the field to capture basic information around competitors in a market that they're looking to enter. And by having all of the facility data in one place and having it collected consistently, can drastically reduce the number of field visits that are required, and can give you information to give you access to all of the information that you need at the click of a button. And we also collect site imagery, again, to help reduce that reliance on site visits. And we can collect facility data in one of 2 ways. Kalibrate can offer a turnkey type solution where we can go out and collect all of that data for you, or we can also provide you with the technology and the training needed to be able to go out and collect that data yourselves. Looking specifically at merchandising, Again, this can give you, merchandising gives you the ability to look at what's actually happening within a store, what the product offering is, and how that differs from store to store. And again, that data can be collected through a turnkey survey or through one of our mobile applications. We can also look at the collection and inclusion of mystery shopper data. So this is the tool that many retailers use to be able to understand how their site's performing when head office aren't necessarily on site. And this is data that we can leverage to understand how a site has been merchandised. It can give you a view of competitor strengths and weaknesses, and also give you a view of specific product affinities that might exist at specific locations. And it can also allow you to optimize your offering using things like customer segmentation data. So understanding what types of people are visiting your location and how you can optimize your in-store offering to maximize sales based on the client base that you have. And finally, we can look at price. So typically, Kalibrate has always looked at a snapshot in time of price position. How is this site pricing relative to its local competition at this point in time? But we also have the ability to leverage third-party data or data from our Kalibrate pricing product to look at the long-term price positioning of one site relative to its local competition. And again, here you can see a heat map for Denver, yellow being prices at their highest, and how price position fluctuates across this specific market. So as you can see, I've talked about our location strength, so understanding the potential of the site, understanding the market in which the client or the site's operated, the brand strength, the facilities at that location, the merchandising, and the price. And that just leaves operations. And operations is typically, as I said earlier, the intangible factor that allows us to understand what's potentially happening that isn't captured in the data that we have, again, to allow us to zone in on specific potential areas of weakness and to identify further operational opportunities for improvement. And by taking all of the data that we have available to us, what I've talked about today and much, much more, and simplifying it to a 7E level, combining it with Kalibrate's decision suites and services, we can take what is a headache for many retailers, and we can simplify it into terms that make the data accessible, make decision-making easier, and can drive huge operational efficiencies, both at a network planning level and in the field, and can ultimately make or allow all of our clients to make better decisions and to move quicker. So the three takeaways of today's session is that collecting the right data can be very, very challenging. As we've seen, the challenges that retailers face can differ significantly from market to market, but there is no one market in this world where you can get access to all of that data very, very easily. It's a huge challenge. Retailers, even the best retailers, have to throw a huge amount of effort at pulling all of those individual data sets together. Whereas Kalibrate, is here. We've been doing it for many, many years, and we help all of our clients pull all of that data together and have one source of truth that can give them a clear and concise data set that can be used to make informed decisions and to back up those decisions when we go to things like approval board and we have to justify the proposed investments to management. Using the 7 elements can help us really understand the strengths and weaknesses at sites and can give us insights into where opportunities exist. So, using 7 elements isn't just about identifying new locations, it's also about optimizing your existing locations and maximizing the return on investment. And of course, by using the data and the insights that can be provided by the Kalibrate Decision Suite can ultimately allow our clients and retailers globally to make better and smarter decisions. So I think that's pretty much half an hour on the dot. So we've got plenty of time to answer any questions that you may have. I will just switch to the chat window to see if there has been any. Okay, so one question we do have is around where the data that I've talked about is available in various different regions. So the data that we have, the data that I've talked about today, is available in almost every market that we operate in. So I'm confident that we can get 7-element insights in any market in which we operate today. As I said, Kalibrate's got experience in around 80 markets globally, and we've been able to get the data that we need to provide our clients with 7-element insights in all of those markets. Some of the data is more available in some markets than others. So if you look at things like mobility data, that is available, in the US, in Northern Europe, in some parts of Southeast Asia, in Australia. It is also available in parts of India, in Africa. However, it does differ fairly significantly from market to market. And part of the service that Kalibrate offers is, we will go out and we'll try and identify where there is data available, and we'll try and leverage that where we can. In terms of things like traffic and demographic data, generally we're able to through a combination of data sourcing and proprietary modeling, we're able to build fairly robust and reliable data sets in any of those markets. So the next question I have is around traffic metrics, and asking if I can please expand on it, of course. So traffic metrics is a product that we primarily have in the US and Canada. However, the underlying data structure and the modeling that we do with that data can be made available in any markets, providing we've got the sufficient underlying data to do some of that modeling work. But essentially what we do is we collect publicly available traffic counts across the US and Canada, primarily. We use it's upwards of 6,000 sources, so everything from large DOTs down to small regional players or even local councils. We scrape all of the data that is available. We standardize and normalize it, so it's one consistent format across an entire market rather than having hundreds or thousands of different data structures. And then from there we can potentially fill in any gaps in the data. So if we can model things like traffic counts at major intersections. We can look at current year estimates where age data is available. And we can look at things like 5-year projections. So if we have sufficient historical trending data, we can use that, combine it with demographics and a couple of other data sources to understand what we expect to happen over the next 5 years in terms of traffic. Average annual daily traffic counts is the primary data point that we use within traffic metrics. So while it is primarily a North American product, all of the underlying processes and modeling can be applied to other markets and has been applied to other markets as part of our product deliveries. Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, so let's look at the poll results. So thank you to everyone for responding to the poll. So 0% of people have challenges with location. 27% of people have challenges with markets. Only 7% with brand. 13% with merchandising, and the majority of people, 40% of people, have challenges with operations, and the second highest is 27% of people with market. So market is something that we can definitely help with. We can understand things like trade area definition. We can look at things like point of interest data, calculate things like proximity to and density of specific points of interest and the impact that has on volumes. And operational improvement is something that we can absolutely help with as well, using things like the 7 elements to determine where there are potential trends in operational performance of sites and where specific sites have big operational issues that can impact volumes, and it can help you zone in on those specific sites to analyze the performance more thoroughly. Okay. I'll just hold on for a second and see if there are any other questions. Okay. Well, there are still a few sessions left in the virtual user conference. So I would encourage you all to carry on attending these sessions. We've got some brilliant stuff planned. Later today, there's a session on fuel marketing planning best practices. And tomorrow, we've got that session on mobility data that I was talking about. Mobility, not just a buzzword. That I'm sure that's going to be really, really interesting. And on Thursday, again, I mentioned that we had an EV session coming up. EV customer segmentation on Thursday. Again, it's going to be a really interesting session. So I'd encourage you all to sign up to that if you haven't already. And I should say that all of the sessions are recorded. So if you aren't able to attend them, then they will be available on demand after the event. So thank you all for attending today. I hope you found it useful. If you do have any other questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat window and we'll follow up with you. But enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.